Were you always aspiring to be a novel writer?
Yeah, I always knew I would write a novel. And I made plenty of false starts before this one. I actually persisted and
Really? And
managed to
you had
complete.
written short fiction earlier?
I
Is it?
started writing when I was 6 or 7.
Right. So okay. So
And
you're
then I
that
started publishing when I was about 14. I got paid for short stories
Yeah.
and stuff.
first short story was published where?
I used to publish in a newspaper, Indian Express,
Right.
and they would pay me 40 rupees each time for
Lovely.
each story. So after 5 or 6 stories, I managed to buy a Click 3 camera.
Wonderful. And do you still have that? Have you preserved
Yeah,
it?
of course.
Great,
It was
excellent.
quite a good camera. It was a box
Click
camera.
3. I know.
Yeah,
At that time,
yeah.
it was just a novelty. And how did the book happen? As in, how did you begin to pull this together after the other false starts?
Even with this book, the false starts were happening 3 or 4 years before I actually started writing it properly.
Mm-hmm.
And the image in my head all along, I noticed both with this book and with the one I finished after this,
Right.
that it
We'll
begins,
come to that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that it begins with a kind of image which starts to just hover in my head all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel as if I have to construct something around that which will take that in as a kind of central motive.
Right.
And in the case of this first book, the image was of this house,
The house.
which
Mhm.
got flooded.
Right.
And this was an actual house. I had never seen it, but I had
Mhm.
seen a photograph of it.
All right.
And it belonged to my aunt, who was married into a family which owned this house on the bank of a river.
Of a river. Mhm.
And the river changed course, and then the water began to rise, and every year they would find bits of their land going.
Mm.
And then finally the picture that she had framed on her wall had the water sort of at the pillars, and you could see that in maybe the next year it would enter through the door.
Right.
So there was this huge sense of impending disaster
Doom.
in that
Mhm.
picture.
Mhm.
And because it was a real picture, and they would tell me that now that house is really underwater.
Underwater.
I found that, as a child, I never knew this would keep on burrowing in my head. But
So it's something
later,
that it's a photograph that you'd seen
I'd
when you
seen
were
it
really young.
every day. Whenever I went to visit my father's sister,
Mm.
there was that photograph on
Mhm.
the staircase when we climbed.
And that's the photograph
Yeah.
that's the image that starts
So
off this book.
Yes,
Mm.
it does.
Right.
And I wrote a whole section of the book which concerned this house getting flooded right at I had thought that would also be the start of the book.
Right.
But later when, the hard nuts and bolts of plotting happened,
Mhm.
it moved much into the center of the book,
Right.
not at the start.
Right.
But that's where it began.
Out of all the very, very sort of entrancing characters in your
Mhm.
book, is there one or more than one which is a particular favorite that you worked your way around, your plot or your story? Did did the germ start with any single character or?
It started with this girl called Boku.
Bokul. Mm-hmm.
But I found later that the boy who she is, sort of friends
Mukundo.
with, yeah,
Mhm.
he took over much more. But my favorite character in the book is actually Bokul's father, Nirmal.
Nirmal.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he has with the other characters I was able to be quite impersonal, or not impersonal, but I was able to
Keep a
maintain
distance.
a distance.
Mhm.
But with him I felt that this I couldn't, when I had to have something not nice happen to him, I really
It
felt
actually-
extremely upset and
Right.
weepy and so on. In part 3, the book changes to first person, and Mukundo starts to speak.
Right. Which is quite a dramatic shift in
Yeah.
terms of the narrative of the book. But it works because somehow you manage to
And that
make
was
that-
again that was really completely unplanned.
Oh, it was.
In this case,
Huh.
it was completely unplanned because I would have, it was as if this guy actually began to speak in my head
Right.
and
And
in
you.
these exact words. And I just wrote it. And then I was landed with these 5 pages in first person. And I knew that it just had to go on in
So
first
you were
person.
literally possessed by your by your character, and it could have been Planchet that you were doing.
I know, this was
Yeah,
very
yeah.
weird.
Okay.
Because later when I began to think logically, I thought this is not such a good idea. Maybe I should not do this.
But it worked
But it
excellent.
did
I mean,
work.
though it does come as a surprise because you're
Yeah.
not expecting it
And
by the
then
time it comes
it
to the
was
end
very
of the novel.
funny how quite a few reviewers gave me sophisticated readings of my intentions that I had never had. So,
That always happens, though, right?
so one
That,
of them said that it's very appropriate that the dispossessed gets
Finds a
voice
voice.
in part 3. I
So,
had not planned
right.
it that way, but
So,
it turned out.
Yeah.
So here is
The
Mukunda.
subaltern speaks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Look,
Okay.
a skeleton, one of my workmen exclaimed. However busy I was and however many buildings I was building, I always supervised each one's first day of digging. That day I sat on a tin folding chair on the building site, shaded by my usual large black umbrella, by then so worn out that the sun came in through its many minute holes as through a salt cellar. The week before, we had cleared out the last of the debris from the crumbling mansion we had demolished, and work on the foundations of a new building had just begun. This is long after Mukundo has left the family which
the
had
family
adopted
house.
him, and he's become a contractor who knocks down houses,
Right.
and by fairly unscrupulous means, he's been trained to grab them and make new buildings. I had been arguing with my manager about some detail in his accounts when I heard the workman's voice. Look, a skeleton. After a pause, I heard another laborer snort with disappointment. Just a dog or cat, Nondu, carry on. I looked into the tumbled earth, and within a tangle of bleached weed roots, I saw an almost perfectly preserved brownish skeleton of what must have been a dog, with the moldy remains of a blanket and an aluminium dish from which it must have eaten all its life. I sat on a stone next to the grave, filled with disproportionate grief for this dog I had not known, for the family that buried its dish and blanket with it because they could not bear to part the dog from its possessions. I thought without reason of the children that may have pranced around with the dog in that vanished mansion's garden. There was a house once whose garden I knew, every last tree, and where the stairs had chipped away and which of the windows would not shut. The ophthalmologist had asked me once, do foreign bodies ever interfere with your vision? Floating black specks? And I thought, not bodies, houses, and not foreign, ground into my blood. Shall we carry on, Babu? The labourer had inquired after a bemused pause. The sight of me sitting practically in the dirt next to the dog's grave had startled him. I could not imagine shoveling the dog out with its things like the rest of the rubbish we were daily heaping into trucks and sending away. 8 families now live in slabs, one on top of the other, over those bones and the dish which I planted deep in the foundation. They know nothing of it, naturally. Skeletons have no place in new apartments. People are afraid of ghosts in old houses. I know it's the new ones that are haunted by the crumbling homes they replace. Old houses don't go away. They lurk crumbling and musty, their cobweb-hung rooms still brooding over the angled corners of shining new kitchens and marbled bathrooms, their gardens and stairwells still somewhere there in the elevator shafts. Left to myself, despite my profession, I would let old houses remain exactly as my memory told me they had always been. Termite would write their stories across ceilings and walls, their wavering lines mapping out eventual destruction. Once the termites had dissolved the houses, returned them to the earth, a natural cycle would be complete. I know all about houses and homes, I who never had one. I am Mukundo. This is my story.
Lovely. do you have happy memories of college and College Street or not?
I think, when we were in college, we thought that was the only reality possible.
Mhm.
We were very happy, and it seemed the only way possible to be very happy
Mhm.
when we were there.
Mm.
When I
Well,
left,
that's the whole charm
Yeah,
of college
but
life.
when
in a
I
way.
left and I met people who'd been to college in Delhi and so on, everybody else seemed so much more sort of ambitious, active. I don't know what they were doing. You've been to the you know that we spent most of our time
In the
doing
college
precisely
canteen.
nothing. Yeah.
Yes, but that was
Yeah.
the happiness part,
Yeah.
quotient that
Yeah, yeah.
kept it high, I think.
Yeah, it's
So-
true.
Oh, so did you feel later that one should have been more
No, I don't know.
proactive in?
I still think that what we were doing, and the things we talked about, the friends we made, really shaped me and
Absolutely.
changed all of the books I read, and all kinds of things changed forever
Mhm.
for me.
Mm.
And that's a huge. I'm glad I didn't go to college in Delhi,
Mm.
but I wonder if some medium, some middle path might not be found where we could at least have done some plays, or I don't know, done something. I've had readers who've been upset over the oddest things, They really wanted each character to be left with a fixed deposit and a savings
Right,
account.
right.
If he's left
But
his
w-
wife,
but-
has he at least given her money? Why don't you say something about
But which is excellent because it
Yeah.
also means that your readers are that much invested
Yeah.
in
one
in
of
these
my
characters.
one of my readers, who a gentleman in Rani Khet, said, "What is this? Your two people right at the end, are they living in sin? What are we supposed to think?"
So to get to your new
Hmm.
the new book, and it's ready.
Yeah, it
absolutely,
is.
and it's with your
It's with the same publisher who did the last book. Well, in
Right.
India, it's not yet contracted to anyone.
Okay,
Picador did my last book. They're
Right.
looking at the manuscript now.
right.
But my British publisher has read it and edited one draft, and he's going to do the same.
And when will it be
Maybe
launched?
maybe this year. I don't know yet.
Excellent. and is it completely different? Is it where
I
did
feel
this
very
come from?
superstitious about
Okay,
talking about it.
Okay,
But
would you not like to talk about it?
I mean,
that's fine.
it's until it's out.
Okay, but you're
It's a kind of possessiveness of wanting it to be just mine as long as
right,
possible.
right. No,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So I was signing at this place called Goldsboro Books, which specializes
London?
in signed first editions. They had said I had to do 250 copies, I think. 100 of them in English and 150 in. They thought Hindi would be my. So then I said no, it's Bengali. So they said okay, Bengali.
Huh.
So
So you
it's-
had to I were
don't-
signing your name,
and I
in
don't
Bengali.
actually have a Bangla signature.
signature. I know. I just thought. I mean,
So there I was sitting, and I could go out and take breaks on and off.
So you were practicing.
Yeah,
a
because
signature.
your hand starts to wobble.
That's right.
And in between, this little man came in wearing a windcheater, British man, and he had this plastic wrapped book.
Hmm.
And he was really clutching it like it was some major treasure. And he came into the shop and he looked at me appalled.
That you could be the author.
And he said, "Drat." And then we all turned and looked at him. And then he said, "Double drat." And then this Goldsboro Books man was terribly. So he, of course, he had God of Small Things in his hand. And he had thought he would encounter Arundhati Roy signing. Instead, he found some
Anuradha.
complete imposter. Then he was sort of sulky, but still graceful enough to buy a copy of my book and
nice.
make me
So that was a happy ending.
Yeah,
And less
but it was-
ambiguous than the ending of your
Yeah.
book. Have you been to any of the festivals, the book festivals?
I've been to the Edinburgh
Edinburgh.
Book Festival. Yeah,
So-
that's it.
And did you need lots of scotch to
Yeah.
get you through your book signing there.
My knees were knocking really
Oh.
badly, like this. And there
And
was
how
a,
many did you knock back
Only
before
one.
this? Oh,
there
only
was a
one.
Dutch writer sitting next to me. He just observed my knocking knees and went in. They have a kind of author's tent
Mm-hmm.
where they have sandwiches and cake and whiskey and wine laid out the whole day.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So he poured me this much neat whiskey and said, just sip slowly. And I said, you know, it's 4 o'clock, I might get drunk.
And
So he said, this is the only way to get
so he
through
gave
it.
you Dutch courage.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good.
In London, they had organized a lot of signings, as well as a few readings. And these signings were of stock, you know. You had to sit
Right.
with these
Piles and piles of
and sign
books.
and sign and
Yeah,
sign
yeah.
for
People who would
people.
buy it later.
And one of the signings was at a place that specialized in first editions, which were signed,
Right.
and collectors would buy them. So I was sitting there and signing, and you're going into a second tape?